Hello and welcome to TelecomTV's Main Agenda programme, sponsored by Hewlett-Packard Enterprise and Intel. 5G is looking very much like a Swiss Army knife, containing a variety of tools to capitalise on the next generation network evolution. To cope with high bandwidth consumption, low latency apps and a world where everything computes, having the right 5G transformation strategy has never been more critical. With the convergence of virtualization, IoT, AI and data analytics, the advent of 5G promises to enable the delivery of a smarter society across all industries. But what are the essential tools and strategies needed to unlock 5G's true potential for business? Well, to help answer these questions, I'm joined in the studio today by Brian Madden, who is Director of Marketing Network Platforms Group at Intel. And also joining us are from Grenoble, Klaus Pedersen, VP Telecom Infrastructure and NFV at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. And from Denver, Colorado, by Will Townsend, Senior Analyst, Carriers and Enterprise Networking at Moore Insights and Strategy. Welcome to all of you. Thanks for joining us today. Will, let me start with you. As an analyst who covers 5G, what major trends are we seeing in the industry at the moment?
Well, from a use case perspective, I spend a lot of time with the carriers as I travel around the world, and three core use cases really bubble to the surface for me around smart manufacturing, healthcare, and smart cities and public safety. And I think you can point to a lot of recent examples in the news. AT&T's announcement in the US to open a smart manufacturing test bed in Austin, Texas, actually my hometown. And most recently in China, there was news around not a telemedicine session, but an actual telesurgery using pre-standard 5G technology.
These are all fascinating use cases. Klaus, 5G promises to deliver this faster throughput and lower latency. But how will this be truly transformative for businesses?
Well, I think what's happening is that we are getting to a point where the actual connectivity is not the issue that people think about when they implement their new infrastructure and think about their services. That combined with the ability to put compute on the edge of the networks and in the manufacturing side, having it all working seamlessly together, is really just creating a new platform for innovation. And I think that's where we are heading. And then there's an underlying fabric, obviously, and standards that enable the much higher throughput, the latencies. But it's really the platform on top that would enable all the innovation we're to here.
Brian, as Klaus says, platform for innovation. I think this is something that strikes a chord with Intel as well.
It does, and I think that 5G is a very exciting opportunity for the industry in general. And innovation is a funny word because when you look at all the big inventions over time, like the telephone, for instance. When Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone, he didn't have a pervasive digital network for the telephone to fit into. He built the solution, and then the infrastructure came behind. So innovation is a really, really important aspect to 5G monetization. And innovation from a developer perspective in software, but also all the way through the network, through as Cloud said, through edge and through cloud as well.
Yeah, and Will, you've already given us a few use case examples there, but it does come back to innovation and creating the right environment, the right platform for this innovation to take place.
Absolutely, and a great example is looking at what 4G technology brought from an innovation standpoint, as Breen was mentioning. No one anticipated ride sharing and the disruption that it would bring to an industry that was very lethargic, that was ripe for right sizing. And so, what's exciting about 5G technology? I mean, we're probably at the kind of the apex of the hype curve there, but given, from my perspective, the extreme low latency with mobility, I believe we're going to see some just phenomenal innovation that even is beyond kind of the core use cases that I spoke to earlier.
Klaus, how do you think operators are best placed to capitalize and monetize these new services we're talking about?
Well, I think in many ways. I mean, they obviously have a lot of trust from large enterprise and government as entities that can hold the data, that can serve them well, etc. Plus a huge subscriber base already today. So I think the economical platform for going to 5G and getting ahead of the innovation curve, deliver new services is there. But the other thing, if we look at carriers' inherent differentiation, could easily come from the fact that they have these very distributed blueprints. They have ability to put or combine, computation, AI analytics on the edge of the network with transport back into their core data centers or delivery of information into their enterprise customers' data centers, and thereby enable new types of services that we can't imagine today, because that really get to the extreme low latency that we are talking about. So I think that there's the sort of the relationship with the consumers as it exists today, and then this distributed footprint that we are only just now starting to think about how to take advantage of.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Klaus, as well, I think that the infrastructure has been a fundamental building block for a lot of the innovation in our industry since the advent of NFV, for instance. We're seeing now today, the infrastructure being highly composable, highly flexible and agile. Now the infrastructure has got to let's say, a maturity level. Now the questions that we need to be asking now are in relation to the software and the services that sit on top of that infrastructure. And to really truly take advantage of 5G, we need to create a developer mindset in the industry, and a developer mindset around innovation and around doing things a little bit non-traditional, moving away from the ARPU-based business models, for instance, into a service-driven business model to really increase that time to revenue guy as opposed to time to market.
Will, I saw you nodding then in agreement about this the new development culture.
Yeah, Breen touched on it. And I spend a lot of time with infrastructure providers that are really building out, developer, ecosystem communities. At HPE, Aruba has their Airhead community, and that's where the real innovation is coming. And Breen touched on something that's really, really important: software defined, and more so than any other G in the past. 5G is going to bring the ability to really deploy software-defined tools so that you can do things like slice networks, guarantee quality of service for both consumer and enterprise service offerings. And that's going to bring a lot of agility to the operators that honestly they haven't had in past kind of iterations of wireless wide area networking technology.
5G is so dependent on software and virtualization. How are we seeing SDN and NFV drive this more cost-effective and scalable deployments?
Well, I think if we look at 5G, it's the first generation of network where, if we look at it from a distance, right, it'll be a fully virtualized distributed cloud. It'll be heterogeneous in the sense that there will still be network workloads running on bare metal. There'll be virtualization container. But what it is an infrastructure that fully leverages all the innovation that comes from the IT industry, and that has actually driven a lot of the innovation we've seen on the internet to date. We're now set up to take that straight into the networks and use all the technologies, all the methodologies that have generated all that innovation and bring it into the networks and through that out to the customers of the carriers as well.
Yeah, and I think, Klaus, as well, we have to move fast. Agility, especially when we talk about cloud economics, is really, really critical. A lot of the cloud service providers that have brought the more innovative services to market have done so in a very, very rapid scale, and have been willing to take risks with regards to monetization, right? Where the fail fast mentality as well. So we're seeing a lot of that cloud-like skill sets, if you will, transferring from IT and enterprise and cloud across into telco and comm service providers today as well. It's really, really exciting.
And is this one of the areas being where open source will play a major role?
Open source has a crucial role to play in accelerating innovation. I happen to be involved in open source through Intel and through some of the communities out there as well. And it's amazing to see the passion around innovation that exists in the open source community. And open source doesn't mean free, and I've said this before. You still need to take the code that's upstreamed and all the collaboration that happens and harden that into products. So you need a very, very strong ecosystem. The other thing that open source does, it kind of brings the communities together. It becomes very, very democratized, and there's an exciting level of evolution of innovation going on in open source as well. The other thing that open source does as well, Guy, is that it helps the operators understand where they can scale their innovation and their services as well. And it creates this really good dichotomy of service innovation.
Will, you're agreeing again
Yeah.
about the role open source is going to play. It does seem that the innovation is there. We now need to harness this.
It is, and I've spent quite a bit of time with the Linux Foundation and their networking team, and what I find really compelling about open source is that when you look at a lot of these working groups, ONAP and others, you're bringing traditionally competitors together, and there's a mutual cooperation, and I believe that open source has the potential to really sort of supercharge that whole development cycle. So completely agree with Breen that open source is really transforming not only on the service provider operator side of the fence, but also it's being very transformative in the enterprise as well with Wi-Fi and traditional routing solutions.
And a really good example of that sort of collaboration, Guy and Will and Klaus, that's going on in the market. You mentioned the Linux Foundation, is around the movement towards a common NFVI. A really let's say a common understanding of what NFVI really needs to be. And that's a really, really important movement. Another really great example is what we're seeing in the Linux Foundation, the networking side as well, is around verification around VNFs, right? Where we can get to a stage where we can offer tools to the industry where VNF vendors can come in and then benchmark and optimize their solutions on that common infrastructure. So that's a community activity based around open source, but not necessarily open source, right? So it's creating that synergy between the traditional infrastructure providers and the VNF vendors to really accelerate time to market as well.
Can I move on to another area that's getting a lot of developer interest and has a lot of application with 5G, and that's artificial intelligence, AI. Klaus, what is HPE doing specifically with AI, given recent talk around closed-loop automation to make our networks and new 5G networks smarter, more self-healing, etc.?
Well, HP has invested heavily in our InfoSight, which is a product that helps automate data centers and maintenance of those based on machine learning and AI. And we are extending that out into the distributed infrastructure of the telco networks, where that's even more critical as you look at edge locations, where you want to be able to predict the next time you're servicing that edge location that you might want to upgrade some servers or preventatively actually replace disks or whatever, so you avoid a failure in the future.
And Will, could I just come to you and talk about AI as well? And what are you picking up as an analyst from the work that's going on, especially as 5G needs a lot of real estate, a lot of edge locations. There's going to be locations there that are going to have to operate independently or as well, very difficult to get to. So are we seeing sufficient work done on AI for 5G?
I think we are seeing that, and one of the challenges, AI has become sort of a whitewash term. Everyone claims it, and when you kind of double click into it, a lot of times there isn't a lot of depth. Where I believe HPE is, very well positioned is, with the data lake. AI is only as good as the training behind it. You need good data to train it. When you look at the depth and breadth of what HPE is doing, not only on the service provider side, but on the enterprise side, you marry Aruba networks into that as well, and you've got a very deep data lake. So, the company can do something very, very meaningful with that data and apply AI intelligently. One good example, Aruba, several months back, announced a green AP feature tied to a Wi-Fi access point. We're kind of going a little off subject from 5G here, but they deployed AI basically to help with the power management, and that's a real applicable use case within the Wi-Fi space. And I believe we'll see a lot of that as 5G rolls out. Now, bear in mind, we're very nascent into the deployment of 5G, so I think we'll see more development and more trends with AI as these networks deploy globally.
Yeah,
but I think there's an important point there that you said you're going off topic a little bit from 5G. I think that's the very essence of 5G, that we start to forget about it as a evolution of the network, but rather look at what is the innovation that meaningfully can be placed in new places for customers, innovate, business models. And that's what 5G does. And then we can start thinking, okay, where could we now use AI? Where we couldn't use AI before. And that's really the discussion about how this, at the end of the day, will create monetization for the carriers and the telcos.
Yeah, I think people position AI and 5G together, and I actually think we shouldn't. I think it's AI and the edge, right? To me, the opportunity around automation, and in fact, actually, automation, I would say, Klaus, is probably still the biggest challenge the industry has to overcome, right? And the role of AI that plays in that, to get those optimized networks functioning correctly, is going to be very, very critical. Will mentioned earlier on some of the key use cases, when we see in areas like industrial or even in retail, and the adoption of 5G, that automation for IoT services is going to be fundamental, and it can only exist in and with artificial intelligence as well.
Well, Klaus, let me pick up on what you just said about edge here, and bringing it around to businesses. What role do you think edge infrastructure will play in extending 5G into enterprises?
Well, if you look at the proposition in the past, given the bandwidth that was available, etc., enterprises had no choice but to execute all their computation on site if it involved things like analytics, etc. That is now an opportunity for the carriers to actually offer the services, the compute infrastructure, so that those enterprises in their remote locations can execute on the carrier's infrastructure, and then with a faster latency, still have the results. So the enterprise can back off the investment in the infrastructure that the telcos then can offer on the edge instead, and go to a services model.
And Will, what are you seeing, this relationship between the edge and 5G and moving to the enterprise?
There's been a huge trend from my perspective with private LTE deployment. So enterprises being able to leverage that wide networking infrastructure, maybe if there isn't fiber to the last mile and that sort of thing. I think also, as Klaus pointed to, the latency advantages with putting compute at the edge. You're seeing trends and also service offerings around software-defined networking solutions, SD-WAN. I mean, that's a pretty hot topic these days, and it's a segment that's growing quite quickly. And carriers in the U.S., for example, like Sprint, are offering SD-WAN services as they partner with these SD-WAN providers.
Brilliant.
I get really excited whenever I hear a question about edge, because I think edge is a fantastic opportunity to bring enterprise services a lot more closer to consumers. SD-WAN, as Will spoke on, but you also have to look at that an edge network has so little legacy today. So bringing technology like cloud native is going to be really, really important as well, and that helps speed up that time to market for those enterprise services. Also as well, when you talk to enterprise verticals today, they go, well, I got to make sure my data is secure, so I'm going to keep it on-prem. I'm going to keep it very, very close to me. But what they're seeing now is that the services that a comm service provider can offer is a lot more than just a pipe, right? They have truck roll, they have relationships with the subscribers and enterprise customers themselves as well. So the edge is now the new sandbox, if you will, for those service deployments, and especially services that require low latency or can take advantage of low latency that comes with 5G. I think that's where you see the rubber hits the road with regards to monetization of services on the edge.
Well, just before we wrap up the discussion for today, can we just take one look at service offerings? Klaus, what service offerings is HPE delivering that will help operators with digital transformation?
So we do a lot of work, obviously, to help the transformation of the networks itself towards 5G. As an example, we are developing platforms specifically intended to support edge computing, including all the acceleration, etc., that's needed for, say, analytics on the edge, as well as doing the radio processing and things to bring down the cost of operating the network. So that's on the network side. Things we will bring forward is work we have traditionally delivered directly to enterprises. We are collaborating with telcos in order to make that service offerings from them that they can offer out to enterprise customers, government entities, SMBs. An example we touched on earlier there was our Aruba portfolio, where we help telcos extend their footprint with Wi-Fi and offer that as a service to enterprises, rather than the enterprise itself having to invest and manage Wi-Fi infrastructure. So those are two very different examples, but examples of what we do.
And Brian, how is Intel helping service providers with digital transformation?
Well, so there's a distinct difference between digital transformation and what we term network transformation, and I think that's an important step in this journey that we're on at the moment. I think that network transformation has been about modernization of networks, has been moving away from fixed function to more standard, high volume service, highly composable. That it continues at pace in the industry. When I see digital transformation, I see it's how we help the industry innovate faster, and how we help broker relationships and conversations across the industry, be it for open source or be it with cloud service providers and telcos, be it with IoT vendors and enterprises, and bringing collaborations together to help accelerate that innovation cycle, as I spoke about earlier on, because there is a move and as I said, a democratization of services, and that's coming from comm service providers, but also the non-traditional providers in this industry as well. And when those collaborations happen, and you know, working obviously with Hewlett-Packard Enterprise is really, really great for Intel, because we have a partner in Hewlett-Packard Enterprise who understand the need to bring that service innovation cycle to the market as well, and that's really, really important.
Will, final question for you, if I may. We've heard what Klaus and Brian have had to say about their service offerings, but what trends are you seeing from a service provider perspective?
Well, you know, one really big trend is, you know, that they will continue to deploy what I call kind of purpose-built or single, you know, focused infrastructure from the likes of Ericsson, Nokia, and so on. But there's a real trend to want to embrace open compute, open, you know, storage, software-defined fabric, and that's where Intel and HPE are really driving the industry, and it's very disruptive from not only an OpEx perspective, but again, you know, that agility, you know, utilizing the software-defined tools is also bringing significant, you know, OpEx advantages as well. You need less staff to sort of manage these new generation networks, and I'll also add that I think, you know, companies like HPE and Intel are doing a great job bringing monetization opportunities to them and helping to incubate that. When you look at 4G, a lot of the over-the-top providers rode on top of all of the network infrastructure that the carriers and operators spent billions of dollars to deploy, yet they somewhat got shut out of the monetization. And I see a lot of activity in, you know, with respect to what HPE is doing and Intel doing, really to bring new monetization opportunities to the operators. And I think that's a tremendous thing that both companies are doing today.
Well, thank you very much, Will. We do appreciate you joining us from this very early hour in Denver. And Klaus from Grenoble and Brian here in the studio. You know, thank you all very much indeed for joining us and taking part. A reminder that you can explore more information around these issues, including access to a downloadable white paper from the website. But until next time, thank you very much for watching and goodbye.